Yep, so you're on. Can you see it?
No. If you go to live now. Okay, so if I click that.
Remember, turn it down.
Yeah, off.
And then get your chat together.
Chat's down here. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even really use the chat last time.
Cool, so we're going to go with this. You ready to roll?
Yeah, mate, we'll just start at just ease on in.
Okay, hello to all, and thank you for joining another episode of Wine and Viticulture Education. My name is Gus Gluck, a London-based wine bar founder and professional taster.
And I am Dr. Dylan Grigg, Australian viticulturalist, and you may know me from my Insta handle, GDilla.
We've started this little channel to kind of like share our passion, and our objective in this series is to bridge the world of wine consumption with its roots in growing grapes. So topics will be wide-ranging and potentially highly nerdy, as there is no set script. You, the audience, are encouraged to throw ideas and opinions into the mix as we tease out and chew the fat on some trendy and not so trendy topics. This session, we are loosely discussing vine age, old vines in the new world. So Dylan, to start with, what is the old world and new world?
I guess it's the opening line to Wine Options, isn't it?
It kind of is, isn't it?
It kind of is. So old world is traditionally where, well, I guess where grape cultivation has been happening for the longest. So you think of Europe generally, and new world is, it'd be nice if you could just say it was Southern Hemisphere, but there's some new world in the Northern Hemisphere. So
Canada. Yeah.
If you split old world and new world, that's what you end up with. Yeah,
it's one of those kind of it feels a bit like a kind of like an aged statement, like an aged world, like word. It doesn't, like, it's not incongruous with this era. It feels far more like last century for me.
Yeah,
personally.
Totally. But what would be another useful descriptor? You can't go Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere.
Who knows? And if anyone's got any ideas of what the descriptor would be, that would be amazing to go live for us. That'd be fantastic.
You could change every Wine Options opener.
It's true. This episode we're kind of discussing vine age and old vines, and you, thankfully, are somewhat of an expert with your PhD. So why are we even talking about vine age? This is the real question.
Yeah, I spent a few years thinking about old vines and vine age. I guess we're talking about vine age because vines can age. I mean, we're dealing with a perennial cropping plant, so it's involved with there's tradition. So the way that these plants are managed can be the same or it can change with time. But if somebody tastes fruit from one vine, they can taste the fruit from that same vine decades or even more than a century later. So there's a certain marketing value, there's an emotional value, and it's not everyone's got old vines. So it's something special.
Yeah, I mean, because it's obviously very, very well marketed, and I think it helps on a consumer level for bringing romance really to a wine.
That's the word I should have used, romance.
Romance, very important for wine.
That's why you're in the marketing side, yes.
I know, sadly. Yeah, so like, how does that actually affect quality from your perspective?
Bang, shooting straight from the hip.
I know.
I'm not sure if we'll get straight there. We should probably tease it apart a little bit more.
Okay, fine. Okay.
So
One of the
things would be if we started talking about old world and new world, you think old world, okay, old vines. Well, not so many old vines, old traditions, yes. And in the new world, we actually, if you think of, South Africa, but Australia, California, we have older vines or more older vines than in the old world.
Yeah.
So if you follow that thread.
Yeah. So, so so why does someone like Australia have such a plethora of old vines?
I guess we should have had more if the government didn't pay people to pull them out in the 80s, but that's another story. But it's the great leveler, the introduction of phylloxera, which is a louse that feeds on the roots of vines, and in the mid 1860s, something like that, mid 1800s, this louse came from America, where the vines, or the US, where the vines had co-evolved with it, so they could handle this louse feeding on the roots. And it was a time of, filling up your glass house with every exotic plant and probably animal that you could drag across. And someone brought across some phylloxera bugs, which can reproduce asexually and go rampant. So phylloxera spread throughout Europe over a very short space of time and killed almost all of the vines in Europe. But the phylloxera louse didn't travel as quickly to the New World, and there are still some places, like in Australia, there's states that have no phylloxera.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's kind of like you're quite apt to be talking about phylloxera in this current era of of COVID, really. It is kind of interesting to think of like as a metaphor of being European and always going places, dragging stuff back.
True. The rapid spread. No, we were trying to avoid the COVID.
I know. But you've got to look at sometimes.
I would more liken it to a downy mildew epidemic.
Yeah. Also, Amber was asking, which states/areas don't have phylloxera in Australia?
So it first arrived on the East Coast. So there is phylloxera in Victoria. There's, I think, under the Brisbane airport, there's also was phylloxera, but I don't think it's been tested to prove there isn't. So maybe there is or isn't. But Victoria is the hot spot at the moment.
Yeah. And also, so why didn't people kind of plant on actual American rootstock?
Well, I guess when phylloxera came to Europe, all the vines started dying, and everyone had to work really hard and fast, like trying to find a vaccine, to figure out a way to get the vines to survive longer. So they did things like injecting poison into the soil.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, wild.
Or building massive walls and completely flooding the vineyard to try and drown these things, which would have drowned the soil, and they released the water so that it wasn't there long enough to kill the vines. But they tried all these different things until someone figured out reconstitution, which is joining American roots onto the French or the European noble varieties. So that was something that once it was invented, it kind of just rolled out through Europe. And I mean, in Australia now, people still don't plant on rootstocks exclusively because there isn't the phylloxera, but there's also a massive cost difference.
What is the actual cost difference? Do you know?
So it can be zero. I mean, you can vegetatively propagate a grapevine just from a cutting.
Yeah,
so you can just go out at pruning, stick it in. Well, you look after it, but stick it in the ground and it'll grow. Whereas when you've got a cutting, or a grafted rootling on American roots, you could be $4 up to $9 a stick.
Wow, so it is quite massive, and obviously because in Australia, what the average vineyard plants for per hectare, 4,000, 5,000 vines?
Yeah, you call it 4,000.
About 4,000. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that is quite a cost change.
it's a huge cost, and you look at if we bring it back to old vines, you look at the oldest vines in the world, they're not grafted because they're on their own roots. Now,
Yeah.
does that mean that they're stronger because they were never grafted? We don't know. The old world is catching up now. The old world's got grafted vines that are 100 years old or more, and we're learning how grafting methodology and management can see these vines become as old as the own-rooted examples that we have now. I mean, they'll never catch up.
Like, how did these old vines kind of like survive in what is known as the old world?
I guess phylloxera needs, well, it doesn't need certain conditions to survive. It needs certain conditions to thrive, and it doesn't like really sandy soils.
Yeah.
It finds them abrasive and difficult to travel through. So you'll find some examples, specifically really volcanic free draining soils.
Yeah.
You could probably think of a few examples off the top of your head that don't have phylloxera.
Wait, so we've got like that lovely picture like of Tenerife, and that's volcanic, isn't it? So let's try to get that up just so people can kind of see somewhat like how old are those vines, do you think?
I don't know. I spent a great day there with Jonathan, and I think he said around 200.
Wow.
But they could be more. I mean, it all limits the records, what the records say. But here,
look at you there.
Oh yeah, posing. so that's one vine that goes behind me and in front of me. And if you go to another picture, I think the next one down, Gus, that shows the 1-year-old shoot.
Yeah. That one? Or this one?
That one. So just hold it on that one and go back. But anyway, the point being is that phylloxera doesn't survive in every soil type. So there's some vines that can live longer, but there's also some management techniques that can help a vine to live longer and stave off wood disease, which will probably be another episode. So if you look at those braided cordons, they used to run those out, and they only ever would make cuts into 1-year-old wood, and they'd put down a little 4-bud cane and then tie that down, and then the next year tie that down. So that's how they got longer and longer and longer. And they were flexible enough that they could move them and grow potatoes in the fertile soil underneath. But the point being is that the braided cordon is not too dissimilar to bush vine pruning, because bush vine pruning also you only make cuts into young wood. Whereas if you go and look for the oldest vines you can find, we'll see. Maybe we're coming to the limit of how old cordon trained spur pruned vines can be, because
how come?
We're always tempted. If you've got a cordon, this is why I need that whiteboard. If you've got a cordon and you get your 2-bud spurs on it, each year they'll grow and they'll get taller and taller. And with VSP, it gets a little bit more difficult to manage. In mechanized vineyards, it's another story, but that's the real challenge, because your fruit zone is always climbing up. So you're tempted as your shoot gets bigger, another shoot comes out, you're like, oh, hello, I'll cut this big one off and we'll start again back down near the arm. But that big wound is then a point of dieback, a point of potential pathogen entry and drying. Whereas bush vines, you've got the arm, you cut to 2 buds. The next year, you cut 1 bud off and you take the next one. And they gradually grow, which is why bush vines are so beautiful, because they just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
The braided cordon is a similar situation where they only make small cuts.
Okay. So on Tenerife, so that's called a braided cordon. Does anyone else use that style of trellising?
Outside of Tenerife, no.
No, I mean, at Santorini, they do have, obviously, they've got the baskets. Well, they basically weave the vine into a basket to protect itself. So that's similar-ish, but it's not but that's not
exactly.
the same.
But if you think about in Santorini, they have old vines there also. But if you think about that, running that wood around and only making small cuts into the youngest wood that's got the smallest surface area, that's the strongest wood, instead of making big cuts, they're braiding that around. So they're also building the carbohydrate store, which helps the old vines to weather the, the ups and downs of seasons like we're getting every year.
Yeah.
But it helps to mitigate some of those things. And that's why we see some of these oldest vines, they're so good to take pictures of, because they've got their own structure.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. I mean, Am had a great question, which is, how long can those braided vines go? So, like, how long do they go for?
I'll tell you in 100 years.
Yeah, how old were those vines there?
200 or more.
It's unbelievable, really, isn't it? It's just,
it's nuts. I mean, the oldest. I mean, I'm drinking from this is one. You see that one?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
backwards, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you been there?
No, where's that?
Maribor in Slovenia. It's the oldest noble grapevine in the world. So there's older vines, but they might not be noble varieties.
Okay.
So this one's 470, I think.
Oh my God.
They've got records in the town of it going back.
Does it actually produce fruit still?
Every year.
Wow.
You can go there and buy a little bottle of
it. That's wild.
It's cool.
But also, so just kind of like following on from that. So discussing kind of European vines on American roots. So with clonal propagation, do you kind of lose that kind of like that, or have we lost that kind of genetic diversity, which means we can now age vines for that sort of time period in general?
Potentially. I mean, we're at the limit of it now in Europe. There's a lot. Well, in Europe, on grafted vines, there's a lot that are often pulled out after 30 years or more because the production sort of dips away. There's still work going on with grafting methods and disease and pathogen issues with grafts, but that's another story. But I think if we go back to the phylloxera, and if we try and link all of these threads to old vines, phylloxera was the leveler, so that brought everything back to zero. But if you think of what had to happen when phylloxera came, is these nurseries needed to get a big stock of vine material, and if you're going to be buying new vines and you're a commercial grower, you want to know what that vine is going to produce. So you're more inclined to go buying a clone, say clone D12, that produces the highest yields, and you'll go and sign up and go, hey, give me 2,000 of D12 because it's got a name. And when you have a very old vineyard, they weren't clonally propagated. That was mass selection. So you've got this benefit in older vineyards of having mass selection. So you've got more genetic diversity in your field, which potentially, I mean, the more complex the system, the more robust it is.
Yeah.
And then if we're talking about flavor and aroma precursors, which are kind of defense mechanisms or attracting mechanisms, in an older vineyard, you're going to have a greater diversity than if you're in a clonal vineyard.
Okay.
So it kind of sets the two apart. But it's not just grafted vineyards that have been, become a monoculture of clones. Even own-rooted vineyards is the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because like you've done tests on like some older vines and stuff in Australia. Do they follow like a very similar sort of clone, or were they just because they're all from the 1850s? So were they all are they all similar clones, like according to variety, that is?
I guess if I lean on my PhD, it was just for scientific purposes. It was just with Shiraz.
Yeah.
It was just with Shiraz in the Barossa, and the genetic similarities they grouped together. They were all Shiraz. Yeah.
Okay.
And you couldn't really tease them apart. But the only way that they could be teased apart on a molecular level was to look at the epigenetics, which is the vine's memory, or it's an adaptation to site. And that showed that they had a greater influence of their site, or where they were growing, because they'd adapted to that site.
Oh wow, okay.
And adapted more with age.
So it's a little bit like what's it called? What's that sci-fi film they had a remake recently? What's it called? Very famous.
No idea, man.
But anyway, so like how clones are produced, and they are there as like the slave to humans, but throughout time they kind of take their character and they kind of move away from their clone, and like their clonal character. Is that kind of what that means?
I think they always keep their clonal character. I mean, people will say, age will trump clone, because a juvenile vine will, juvenile vines are juvenile vines, and they behave that way. And then once they get to be a teenager or in their 20s or more, people will say that, clones, that if you had them all planted separately, they'll kind of come together. But some of them are the phenotypes are so different that they'll never come back together. But what they will do is they'll all adapt to site and soil.
Okay.
So if I recount a little story that a very famous winemaker told me about taking Shiraz cuttings from the oldest vines, like the highest quality, and planting them like really close to there on their own, on the same soil.
Blade Runner was the film. Sorry.
Blade Runner. Okay.
Blade Runner. Yeah.
Thanks. Close that loop.
Yeah. Thanks, Lauren.
Anyway, the point being, you can take the same cutting, plant it nearby, and the young vine was different on the palate. The sensory attributes were different, and they thought, well, it's the old vine material; it should be the same. And it wasn't until 15 or 20 years later that they started to look a little bit more alike. Once the young vine has started to adapt to the site, get its roots down, calm down, get more balanced.
Okay, so really, like on a quality level, so like, is there really?
You're coming back to that again already, Gus.
I'm sorry. I know. Okay. We won't do that. Okay, so where should we go from here?
No, we can. I'll give you the quick snapshot, and then we can talk thesis another day.
Okay, cool, fine.
Would you prefer that?
No. No, but actually, like we should move on to kind of clones, like, or back to clones anyway. Yes, how do you actually propagate clones?
Well, because vines have been vegetatively propagated forever, for thousands of years, because they don't breed true from seed. So you've got to take a cutting. So you go out to a field and you look at each individual vine and you say, hey, this vine's got a monster. Well, this is what they did in the past. This vine's got a monster load on it, or this vine's got heaps of color, or these vines have all got a bit of disease and this one's not. Usually it's bunch size or sugar or acid or something. And you identify that one vine, and then you take a stick from that, or 20 sticks, as many as you can, and you put them in the ground, grow them out, then you just keep going like that. So, the most famous Shiraz.
So that's to keep that genetic line going.
You keep the genetic line going. So the famous Shiraz clone is 1654, which is like row 16, vine 54 from like the research station.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, they often have cryptic names like that.
That is hilarious.
Yeah.
Wait, so okay, so that's why. Wait, so why is MV6 called MV6 as being a very famous Pinot Noir clone?
Yeah, because it came from one of the original mother vines. It stands for Mother Vine 6.
Mother Vine 6, okay. There it
There's
is. Okay.
also a couple other MVs. I know of MV3, but a lot of them just die out, I suppose.
Yeah, guessing so.
If
You've
they're no good.
And everyone's listening, like MV6 is a famous one for Pinot in Australia, but mostly Victoria. Is that right? In general.
In general, yes, and in general, Victoria's probably, I don't know, maybe got the lion's share of Pinot.
Yeah, probably actually. But if you would like productivity, but why do producers in certain parts of the globe like rip up vines? Is it all to do with like yield? Is that the main answer?
I think that's the main answer. Once yield starts to
Okay.
decline, for whatever reason, I mean, it might be declining because of soil health. It might be declining because of, more often than not these days, trunk disease because of poor pruning practice. But generally, it's related to economics, which is the old, the old saying: if are old vines good because they're old, or old because they're good? Most of them, if they're really old, like we're talking 100 plus, 100 and up to 170 years old, I think in Australia, they've obviously stood the test of time. So they've been through all sorts of ups and downs.
Yeah.
But they've either been a consistent producer, maybe not always of quality, maybe of quantity, because they've made it through periods when everything was judged on quantity and alcoholic degree.
Yeah.
So maybe they're not what we would class as a quality clone or a quality vine selection these days. There's some of the old vine Barossa selections have got big bunches.
Yeah, and even famous sites you've done, like even like Henschke, like Hill of Grace, they've got quite large bunches, don't they? They've got quite a large yield.
Yep. Yeah, on a vine level. I mean, I could. I've got some classic photos of if you cane prune old vine Shiraz, like you can get a cane and a wall of big bunches. There's a bunch. Pull up that picture of the bunch with the wing on it. We talked last week about flowering and how the branching, the inflorescence primordia kind of dictates the size of the bunch. And this will give you an idea of what a Shiraz bunch can look like.
There we are. Can you see it?
I can see it perfectly.
Yeah, look at that.
Looks great, and it's plump, hasn't gone wrinkly. But anyway, that is just an example of, I mean, you often get bigger bunches if you cane prune at the end of the cane. But that's why a lot of people will spur prune old vine vineyards or vineyards to try and reduce the yield of Shiraz, because it can just be a prolific cropper. If you think about why the people when they were coming to Australia to escape persecution, they weren't always stopping past, their favourite chateau to pick up some cuttings. They're probably just dropping them in their back pocket and getting the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah, true. Aaron who makes like Semillon in America said, like our large bunches more from plenty of water. Do you feel like people over irrigate old vineyards?
Hi, Aaron. No, I think you can. It's at risk though, because you've got such a big, potentially large root system. A little bit of water can go a long way. So if you've got old vines, you've got higher capacity. So it's relative to the potential capacity. You got younger vines, you've got smaller trunks, smaller roots, less leaves. So you're somewhat limited. But absolutely, if you overwater those things, man, they can go nuts.
Yeah.
But I've seen plenty that are dry grown that also, if the rainfall comes at the right time, will have a high crop.
And then what about other like inputs when it comes to like nutrients and pest prevention? Like, how does the regime change with those older vines as well?
I think they're all still they're still susceptible to the main the main issues, powdery mildew, downy mildew, botrytis, trunk disease, things like that. But if you look at where the oldest vines are, it's generally pretty dry and pretty hard country, which is why that wood hasn't completely rotted away. That's why I was interested to see over on Tenerife, because it was actually quite green and lush and humid on that side in the Orotava Valley where I was. And I was like, wow, your wood is really holding up. Whereas if you look at some of the old vines in, in the Barossa and even in parts of Spain, the wood dries right out. So it then kind of kills any pathogens that are in it. So in terms of management, similar management to young vines, but I think, I don't know, I didn't get to the end of this in my thesis, but I think there's greater resistance to pests based on the resilience due to epigenetics.
Yeah.
I mean, I did go down that rabbit hole looking at looking at the genes that were regulated and the pathways that were regulated, but never got to the bottom of that rabbit hole.
It's that could be your life's work.
It could be. It's good fun.
But also, so when it comes to then like nutrition, all that kind of stuff, so then like pruning, like does that change drastically when it comes to older vines or older vineyards?
If you want them to be old and continue to live, yes.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, anyone can hack a vine. You could prune a vine, Gus, no problem.
Yeah.
It'll grow next year, but in 10 years' time, will it still have quality production or not have wood disease? I think that's one of those points I was making earlier about the braided cordon and bush vines and these pruning techniques that, as the golden rule is, don't make cuts into old wood, the vines will survive longer. So if that is what you intend to do, then in your pruning, be it permanent arm or cordon trained or rod and spur or cane prune, you've got to consider how you're making your cuts, and you've got to make cuts into the youngest wood possible, which in some vineyards, when the vines are super close together, means your vines are going to overlap. They're going to go like this because each year they'll grow. So then there's implications to the planting density and the people that can do it effectively.
Also, like Amber had a question as well, and we're actually running out of time, so we should probably wrap it up soon, which is there's a lot of assumption that old vines are better. What's the science actually behind this? And is it simply to do with reduced yields? But we discussed this and it doesn't really reduce yields.
I got told I was crazy for taking it on as a PhD topic, but no one's really researched it. You try and dig up. There's a paper out of Gussenheim, I think, is a German thesis that maybe is published now. There's mine, and then all you can do is you can search through the peer-reviewed literature and find little snippets, but no one talks about age because it's so hard to set up a proper replicated trial that you can have the statistics stand up to, so that 0.05 scrutiny. But I'm not delivering a lecture at a scientific conference now, so I can tell you. I'm free to speak.
Free to speak. I mean, well, like, do you think that you would like to at all still pursue that kind of line, like of adding more to that literature?
The one thing that my thesis did, I covered multiple disciplines, like 5 or 6 disciplines. Like, I had way too many supervisors. They're all great, don't worry. But it was just a real challenge. But the idea was to cast the net, because no one's really looked at it, to try and rule in or out certain aspects of physiology, chemistry, flavor chemistry, metabolomics, genetics, all of these sort of things. And at the end of the thesis, sure, I had more questions than I had at the start. It's part of that whole thing that I love, as your knowledge grows in the sphere, the outside surface gets even bigger. But there's definitely We need to look at the gene expression. We need to actually look at roots. I didn't get the okay to go digging up 170-year-old vines to look at where their roots are.
Yeah.
So that question still hasn't been answered properly. And the other thing is to maybe have a different trial where you do like Erin suggests. You have old vines, you water some and you don't water some.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. So yeah, it's really like the whole thing is maybe like creating like actual like test vineyards for this. So being able to, and well, so do you think that you would have scope in your hopefully extremely long career to be able to do this?
I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows?
If yeah.
Please, and if someone's watching, like One Australia watching, come on, like we need more literature, because it helps everyone this, because like again, this is a huge question, and obviously we all have to wrap it up now, but it's something that it defines like both consumers and growers like massively is old vines, and
exactly,
again, it is a romantic thing.
It's romantic, but we need something consistent. I haven't even talked about the US, but I know every country's got a different age that they classify as old, and the methods of determining true age are very difficult because the vine doesn't have heartwood. Like last week or the week before, I said it's a liana. So you can do dendrochronology and look at the rings, but they're not as consistent as a tree that creates that structure year on year.
Okay, yeah. Oh wow. Well,
so
you've opened up a whole new world, which we might have to change, like episode 4. But
we might
we'll come back to that.
I think we should. We should take some questions, but also I've got a heap of ideas now. But we should do Old Vines session 2.
Okay, so then next week we'll probably do this the same time next week. We'll do Old Vine session 2, because it's huge. But as you know,
I have a large document and I spent a lot of time thinking about it, so I know, I'm aware.
Well, thank you everyone who joined us today for this session, and we really appreciate it. Please tell more people about it. We are just genuinely doing it just to hopefully engage with people. So we'll be back next Monday, the 13th of April, which will be most likely Old Vines Part 2. But I was Gus Gluck.
And I'm still Dylan Grigg.
And we'll catch you on the next one.
Will do. Ciao.